Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Walsh. We have a great one for you today on the show. We are live today as Afghanistan nears complete and total collapse, or at least the U.S. government installed there. Anyway, the insurgents, the Taliban insurgents, after seizing control of the eastern city of Jalalabad, encircled the Afghan capital. A senior American official said that key diplomatic staff had been moved to a compound at the airport. So they are really getting hairy right now. Things are really getting bad. Not all of the massive United States presence has fully left the country. So what they're doing now is pretty much a complete and total scramble. Not the way the Biden administration wanted this to go, as they frantically try and get themselves out of the country. Meanwhile, as we really take stock at this, we hope, closing point on the war on terror, we're going to take a look at some of the lives it has destroyed, including the most high-profile al-Qaeda plot foiled after 9/11, the famous Liberty City 7. As a new Frontline documentary details that case as a complete and total fraud. A group of men the FBI coached into pledging allegiance into al-Qaeda. And also, Spencer Ackerman, the author, making the case that the Trump years were the logical conclusion of a multi-decade borderless war on terror that destroyed countless lives without seemingly ever ending. We're going to take a look at those stories and more, as well as live reports from Afghanistan. This is Newsflash. All right, so we're getting into that today, and thank you so much for joining us here. We're going to take you live for just around the, normal, how long we go, half hour or so, just as the latest, bringing you here on the Afghan political situation and military situation as President Ashraf Ghani of Afghanistan has fled the country, a top Afghan politician said on Sunday as the Taliban closed in the capital city of Kabul. Abdullah, who held the position of chief executive of the government from 2014 to 2020, said in a Facebook video that Ghani, who had resisted calls for him to step down to avoid a bloody battle for the capital, had left Afghanistan. Afghan media had also reported his departure. This is in the New York Times. The Taliban's relentless, rapid advance across Afghanistan brought them on Sunday to the outskirts of the capital, Kabul, the last major city controlled by the government. As it became clear the Taliban were at the gates of the capital, thousands of Afghans who had sought refuge there after fleeing the insurgents' brutal military offensive watched with growing alarm as the local police seemed to fade from their usual checkpoints. They were kind of relenting because they were just completely outnumbered. The situation is not good, says Wais Omari, a street vendor in the city. If it gets worse, I will hide in my home. Really a lot of fear. And again, really the situation is we're kind of looking at it now. It seems rather unclear. I've seen some reporting saying that the Taliban have made a statement saying that they will not enter the city by force. That has been widely reported, but I also read just recently here in this New York Times article that, yes, they are considering to enter the city by force. Of course, as someone who is interested in seeing human life be protected, we'd rather see them, of course, do negotiations and come to this, foregone conclusion pretty much peacefully. And really what this represents is the end of a $2 trillion. And, a lot of people say, the Iraq war was the worst foreign policy decision. We couple that right there with the Afghanistan war 100% in just terms of a tragic waste of lives and resources. $2 trillion spent on this war, building and maintaining, Afghanistan as what was becoming more and more just a colony of the United States, a place where U.S. contractors, U.S. leeches were pretty much permanently posted up on the country, supporting all these characters who, like the company of young boys, really just awful things that we did there, all just to keep this, fragile situation going. And, the moment we left, again, I cannot say this enough. After 20 years and $2 trillion, think of all the things that we could have done if we just had not gone there and had a government willing to do them. That's, of course, the key second part. But think of all the resources wasted on this awful situation. The idea that so many people are going to try and tell you today is, oh, yeah, Biden did it. Sure, yeah, Biden could have done it in, a smoother way. But the key thing is he is the first president in 20 years after pretty much everyone after Bush made the promise, yeah, we're going to get out of there. Obama did, Trump did, and Biden did. And it looks like he will finally be the person to fully withdraw. It's unclear whether the troops they're putting in there is just to help the overall evacuation, or there's going to be some sort of, real attempt to fight back the Taliban. But I highly doubt it. And, if there was, it would obviously be incredibly foolish, because we did this thing 20 years, and 20 years we spent supposedly building up this and maintaining this, impressive Afghan U.S.-backed security force, all for it to get rolled over before the United States can even fully leave. Like, this is an absolute embarrassment for not only for the United States, but also it's a travesty for the lives of the Afghani people. As it became clear, the Taliban were at the gates of the capital. Thousands of Afghans who sought refuge there after fleeing the insurgents' brutal military offensive watched with growing alarm again as these local police seemed to fade from their checkpoints. The Taliban said in a statement they were in negotiations with the government and would not take the city by force, but hours later they issued another statement saying they would in fact enter the city. The United States military stepped up its core evacuation of American diplomatic and civilian staff. A core group of American diplomats who plan to remain at the embassy in Kabul were being moved to a diplomatic facility at the international airport, where they would stay for an unspecified amount of time, according to United States officials. On the civilian side of the airport, a long line of people waited outside the check-in gate, unsure if the flights they had booked out of the country would even arrive. After days in which one urban center after another fell to the insurgents, the last major Afghan cities that were still controlled by the government other than Kabul were seized in rapid succession over the weekend. The insurgents took Mazar-e-Sharif in the north late on Saturday, only an hour after breaking through the front lines at the city's edge. Soon after, government's security forces and militias, including those led by the warlords Mashar Abdul Rashim Dostum and Atta Muhammad Noor, fled, effectively handing control to the insurgents. That guy Dostum, there's videos of him, the Taliban inside, by the way, inside his house, his very opulent, Trump Tower-like style house, in there just partying it up, having a good time. And it really just shows you, war is a racket, and these people were propped up. And when push came to shove, and the products, the fruit of this 20-year investment in Afghanistan were finally there, ready to show, they fled, they ran away, it raises the question again: what was the United States doing there all this time? And the answer is enriching the military-industrial complex, enriching on the people that need to be enriched in Afghanistan and especially in the United States, to just continue sucking resources out of that country, and again, as some people will tell you, some people will openly tell you, is just creating this kind of, or setting the stage for this long, 200, 300 year occupation, colonization of that country. The insurgents, again, they took that place, Mazar-e-Sharif in the north, a huge, huge deal there, a key point in the city. On Sunday morning, the Taliban seized the eastern city of Jalalabad. In taking the provincial capital and surrounding areas, the insurgents gained control of the Torkham border crossing, a major trade and transit route between Afghanistan and Pakistan. The Taliban Offensive, which started in May when the U.S. began withdrawing troops, gathered speed over the past week, and city after city, the militants took down the Afghan government flags and hoisted their own white banners. Despite 2 decades of war with American-led forces, the Taliban have survived and thrived without giving up their vision of creating a strict state governed by a stringent Islamic code. After, of course, the Taliban took control of Afghanistan in the 1990s, movie theaters were closed, Kabul television stations were shut down, and playing of all music was banned. Schools were closed to girls. So just really, Sharia law, all the stuff, the fundamentalist parts of the religion, which, by the way, the United States has nothing but itself to blame. Every single problem here, it's incredible. Sometimes there's a little bit of nuance in a situation. We know it's not entirely the United States' fault, but we literally backed the Mujahideen, which later became the Taliban, this kind of fundamentalist Islamic groups, over the Soviets and over the democratic secular, much more secular elements that were present in Afghanistan over the time, and that culture has nurtured for the last 20, 30 years, and look where it is now. those people that we supposedly were supporting in previous times have turned out to be some of our worst enemies and are now going to hand us an incredibly embarrassing military defeat. Despite many Afghans' memories of years under the Taliban rule before the U.S.-led invasion in 2001, the insurgents have taken control of much of the country in recent days with only minimal resistance. So, I mean, what there will be at this point is just, probably, of course there's going to be corruption, but, it's going to be at least one, consistent person. I'm definitely don't force. So I definitely don't claim to be an expert on, the dynamics of how people really feel in Afghanistan. I should do a bit more research on that, as I'm sure it's not going to be leaving the news anytime soon. But their rapid successes have exposed the weakness of an Afghan military that the United States spent more than $83 billion to support over the past 2 decades. As the insurgents campaign has accelerated, soldiers and police officers have abandoned security forces in even greater numbers, with the cause for which they risk their lives appearing to be increasingly lost. So Ghani, the Afghan president, resisted pressure to step down, but in a recorded speech aired on Saturday, he pledged to prevent further instability and called for remobilizing the country's military. But the president was increasingly isolated, and his words seemed detached from the reality around him. On Sunday, Tolo TV, one of Afghanistan's main independent channels, related that 2 sources had said that Mr. Ghani had left the country, adding it was not clear where he was headed. Lotfullah Najafazida, the head of news at Tolo TV, said in a Twitter post that Ghani had departed with his core team. So he apparently said that Biden apparently has accelerated the deployment of additional 1,000 troops. I heard that's been up now to 5,000. Again, this is very much a developing situation to help get American citizens out. He made it clear that he would not reverse his decision to withdraw all combat forces. I was the 4th president to preside over an American troop presence in Afghanistan. 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, Biden said on Saturday afternoon. I would not and will not pass this war on to a 5th. One of the few things where Biden, having helped instigate a lot of this war on terror stuff, seems to be really solid on. Like, he does not seem to be wavering, and he's going to face a lot of pressure from very, liberal influencers, people who have lent support to him in these, highfalutin, very much establishment circles are going to be like, this is a real embarrassment for Biden. And it is. It is principally, though, an embarrassment for the United States military, the United States industrial complex, where a lot of times, when the Washington Post a few years back released the Afghanistan paper, was pretty much compiling a long list of all the times where this war was really known to be hopeless, and we kept pushing for it, and very much in a similar dynamic to the Pentagon Papers, how much resources and money we were wasting there. That wasn't covered. But really, what this withdrawal has exposed, is the absolute, tomfoolery. I don't know, it's definitely too light of a word there, but what have they been doing? What have they been doing all this time for the result to turn inevitably to end up like this? Like, this is an utter embarrassment, and it really a huge indictment. I mean, I'd say much less so on Joe Biden, who's been in there for 6 months. I mean, of course, it's totally fair, and I will gladly talk about his role in why these troops were there in the first place and why the whole war on terror thing existed. And, he does have a large role to play in that. But this looks way, way worse for all the people propping up this war, pushing it for it to go on indefinitely. And when push comes to shove, when it's actually time to push Afghanistan on, to send it on its way, and this is what we get. Secular Talk tweeting, Afghanistan was going to become Talibanistan if we left in 2004, 2010, 2021, or 2036. So if you insist we should. If you insist we should say, just be honest and say forever, because that is really what it's about. It is about forever wars. It's about people have been this. Max Boot, he is a never Trump conservative, been endeared into liberal circles, been a big CNN commentator in recent days or in recent years after the Trump era. But yeah, this is his take. This is the take of a lot of people in high up American establishment circles, which is, yeah, we should have stayed throughout this whole thing. This is equivalent to, the British and Indian Wars. Like, we are maintaining a global frontier. This is what we are doing. Like, we are the new source of colonization. We are the new, we are the people who are going to be, running this thing. And, front, what's the word? What's the exact phrase that he used? Policing the frontiers of Pax Americana. Really, really, very interesting. So, there is a guy apparently streaming now in Kabul. It is, that's a thing that's kind of going viral on Twitter. But what we are looking to is just trying to get the latest here. So we know Ashraf Ghani has left, but it's really going to be interesting to see how this plays. I think, really, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out with, the American public, because what we've already seen is a very traditional and, to be expected, a big partisan switch. When Trump was trying to push troops out of Afghanistan, Democrats were like, they're not really, they were still overwhelmingly supportive of it, but, less so. That, of course, has increased once Biden got in there. And now Republicans are being all, this is an embarrassment. America first. Trump would have done it better, all that stuff. But it's really going to be interesting to see how the United States public processes this military defeat. And, of course, it's going to be who is spinning that narrative to them. Where are they getting their information from? And it's going to be interesting to see how that opinion polling is borne out, over the next week or so. The speed of the Taliban's advance has thrown exit planning into disarray. When many analysts had believed that the Afghanistan military could be overrun after international forces withdrew, they thought it would happen over months and years, now at risk being completed in a matter of days or weeks. That is a huge, huge and, very, searing, I think, indictment into what we have done here and, the absolute failure that has been wrought. It's a failure in what the stated goals were, but in terms of what the actual goals were, which is just making everyone really rich, doing tons and tons of, shall we say, interesting things with a certain flower that grows in great abundance in Afghanistan. That part of it was a complete success. There's no hiding from that. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our segment to tell you all about what's going on here on the Spencer Walsh Radio Network this summer. We do, as I'm sure you know, have a great lineup available for you. We, of course, start with our flagship show, Newsflash, all new Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Uncultured, irregularly back every Saturday with live music and sports analysis with my co-host for the summer, Bennett Laxton. Hidden History will be brand new every Thursday on a bit of a hiatus, but will return shortly. It's the summer of podcasting. It's the summer of sounds. All you got to do is just keep listening wherever you get your podcasts, always here on the Spencer Walsh Radio Network. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's move on and get going. And yeah, we're definitely going to be continuing to follow the situation. Of course, if anything continues to break during the show, but we will be probably off the air when major stuff gets down. But let's move on. The biggest Al-Qaeda plot the FBI claimed to have foiled in the years following the 9/11 attacks involved no weapons, no plot, and no Al-Qaeda. Instead, the vague and plausible threat by a group of construction workers in Florida to blow up U.S. buildings, including Chicago's Sears Tower, was mostly the making of the FBI. We've talked about this on the show many times before, especially over the summer with various, plots, including the Capitol riot and the plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer and the roles that the FBI had in that. Now we're seeing how, they got their start. This was with the Liberty City 7 case, known by its connection to the poor, violence-ridden Miami neighborhood where the men lived, was the most high-profile FBI investigation of the supposed terrorist cell after the attacks in New York City and Washington, D.C. It came as the Bureau, which had obviously failed to act on intelligence it had received before 9/11, faced enormous pressure to predict and stop the next attack, setting off its transformation. in the words of former Deputy Director John Pistole, from reactive crime-solving agency to preventative national security agency. And that key switch there from reactive to preventative meant one big thing, surveillance, and it also meant a second big thing, which is, the pressure, the insane pressure to produce results at all costs, and to keep, the gravy train flowing, the system from operating the way it should. The ordeal of 7 black men, most of them Haitian American, who were manipulated by 2 paid FBI informants into pledging allegiance to al-Qaeda, is recounted in a new Frontline documentary, In the Shadow of 9/11, by British director Dan Reed. It was really kind of absurd, almost unbelievable. Reed said, who has previously directed documentaries about terror attacks in Moscow and Mumbai. I didn't really understand how the Liberty City guys could have got themselves in this predicament. It was really just an incredible, awkward, weird situation. So the story of the 7 men, 5 of whom were sentenced to a cumulative 43 years in prison in connection to the case, is a largely forgotten tale about the lengths of which the government agencies were empowered to go to in the panicked aftermath of 9/11 and what they did to produce results. Increasing a culture of fear and a fake culture of fear, and, of course, the only people that you can trust to stop it are the U.S. government. So that creates, a lot of faith, a lot of trust, and especially a lot of fear in the people at the top, and they, of course, being the only people that we have to, protect them. So, of course, it's okay if they, spy on their phones for a little bit. It's not going to be a big deal. They're catching terrorists. But no, they were not, especially in this case. So this case is really indicative, here in The Intercept, Alice Sperry writing, the case is indicative of how quickly the so-called war on terror morphed into a battle to shape a narrative that there was a real threat and that the U.S. government was winning. The case set the stage for hundreds of FBI sting operations in the following years as the Bureau continued to frame individuals who were often poor, credulous, and had dubious ability to independently plan any attacks. In doing so, the agency leaned on a sprawling surveillance apparatus set up after 9/11 and used constitutionally protected speech as a basis for monitoring people, even as Bureau officials regularly denied doing so. FBI agents relied heavily on well-paid informants operating with little accountability, and they expanded the stings to an ever-growing list of supposed threats, not only foreign-inspired ideologies, but also domestic ones, like that posed by what the FBI called, quote, black identity extremism, which is another great little rabbit hole you can go down there, talking about some of the black fear of a black homeland, and just the really strange drive to create this fear around, they're not really strange, but you could probably piece together why they did. This is the same reason why they were doing this. The stuff we talked about on Hidden History with the Black Messiah movement, that all is very much linked. Creating this fear, creating this demonization of the other, all of this. There are people out to get you, and the intelligence movement, the intelligence community are the only people that can stop them. As The Intercept detailed in the trial and terror database, most of the nearly 1,000 people the U.S. has prosecuted for terrorism since 9/11 never came close to committing an act of violence. Like the Liberty City 7, most had no connection to terrorist groups, and many were set up in FBI stings. Those cases were not only unnecessary, colossal wastes of investigative and prosecutorial resources that destroyed people's lives, but they also distorted the American public's understanding of security threats after 9/11. This is literally what happened. This is literally what happens in all the fantasy books, all dystopian books that people love to, hump for their own political purposes. This is 1984. No, this happened, and so much of the mainstream political establishment was actively there for the intelligence agencies doing it, supporting it, and making you feel unpatriotic if you didn't. They're catching terrorists. Don't you not want to see terrorists caught? People were trying to raise the alarm about this, and just was not being listened to. And it really goes to show the incredible lengths that these people still have. They still have this power, and they're still using it. And now they just happen to be doing it with right-wing people, and that is really what makes things quite awkward. All right, let's move on to our next story. A really very kind of sad situation. This is from Ryan Devereaux in The Intercept. with Spencer Ackerman making the case that the Trump years were the logical conclusion to a multi-decade borderless war without end. Fahim Qureshi was 13 years old when the war on terror came crashing into his life. Fahim lived in the village of Zaraki in the tribal regions of northwestern Pakistan. He was coming home from long day of errands and prayers when the missile struck. Flames ran up the left side of his body. Shrapnel tore through his stomach and peppered his eyes. Fahim spent 40 days in the hospital and lost 17 relatives, including 2 uncles and his 21-year-old cousin that day. It was January 23rd, 2009. It was President Barack Obama's first big drone strike. Yay! Black president sending drone strikes. How awesome. What a strong leader standing up to terrorism. We love him. He's the best. Of course, thousands more would rain down on the area surrounding Fahim's home in the years that followed. At least 66 children died in those strikes, a victim of a covert war the whole world knew about and the U.S. government refused to acknowledge. Fahim Qureshi is one of the names. Spencer Ackerman, the author of the new book, Reign of Terror, How the 9/11 Era Destabilized America and Produced Trump, wants readers to remember. Adam Hassoun is another, a Palestinian refugee. Hassoun was arrested in 2002 for donations he made to Muslim charities in the 1990s, and really just showing you how this like kind of cultural prosecution, culture of fear, and trying to wind people up, boost those arrest numbers. We're boosting a Muslim terrorist sympathizer. No, like he made donations to charities back in the 1990s. Like this is not someone who anyone in their right mind should be arresting. This guy, for again making donations to Muslim charities in the 1990s, spent 4 years in solitary confinement, which by the way is torture, before going to trial, where he was locked away for a decade and a half. After serving a sentence, Hassoun was handed to the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, an agency that itself owes its very existence to the September 11th attacks. Under President Donald Trump, the third American president to preside over the war on terror, a previously unused provision of the Patriot Act, would become the basis for Hassoun's indefinite detention on U.S. soil. He was, in the words of the FBI, a casualty of war. For Ackerman, the stories of Fahim Qureshi, Adam Hassoun, and others like him were critical to bringing his debut book to life, a reminder of the millions of human beings around the world and who were and continue to be impacted by the global war on terrorism. And think about that. Like this is something that more than anything, I say for a lot of times, the United States, for the situations it gets themselves in, the tragedies that happen and befall us, we a lot of times have ourselves to blame for a lot of it. Because when we are doing this stuff, when we are raining bombs down on civilians, when we are arresting people for things like this and locking them up with, for years and years and years without trial and solitary confinement, and then giving them a trial, which I'm sure was, completely ethically done, and then putting them away for even more time, that is not stuff that engenders goodwill and good nature. We are seen as all across the world as the evil empire, and Americans really do not understand this. They just do not understand this. Because, of course, we have this, huge media enterprise and, huge, cultural propaganda devoted to describing us as, we're the shining city on the hill. Everyone wants to come to us. And it's just so delusional because we have been creating the situations that create refugees for, I don't know how many years now, decades upon decades. Once in office, Ackerman argues that Trump internalized and weaponized the war's most important lessons of all. The terrorists were whomever you said they were. A Pulitzer Prize winner whose work has appeared in the Daily Beast and The Guardian, Ackerman this year chose to go independent, partnering with an editor to publish his journalism via Substack. He spoke to The Intercept about how the disconnect in how the United States a U.S. security state has historically responded to the nation's oldest, deadliest form of terrorism, that of the white supremacist far right, and its world-altering response to the September 11th attacks. Ackerman also recounted how events early on in Trump's presidency, particularly the reemergence of key figures in the war on terror as top administration officials, motivated him to write Reign on Terror, and spoke about how the people whose story shaped the book, and shared his analysis of the state of the war on terror today and where it might go next. So he very interestingly sets the prologue of the Reign on Terror in Oklahoma City, a far-right paramilitary. Elohim City in Oklahoma, which is a far-right paramilitary compound that Timothy McVeigh visited before the Oklahoma City bombing in the 1990s. As I was writing the book, he says, this was one of the first things I really saw vividly. I felt strongly about this, how I needed to proceed both narratively and structurally to bring the whole critique home. I think it's very often very hard to see the whole war on terror because particularly 20 years on, we don't tend to think of it as one thing. We tend to think of it as the Afghan war, the Iraq war, there's drone strikes, there's surveillance and so forth. So we don't see it as one entire movement, one entire push. But a way in which you can really see how the whole corpus, he says, is when you look at the mass casualty terrorism event perpetrated by a white person. And when you look at the terrorist attack committed by Timothy McVeigh in April of 1995, you see really clearly in the aftermath whom it was acceptable to target and whom it was forbidden to target in a way that prefigures the response to 9/11 in kind of a scary echo. So he said, we start in Elohim City because I was determined to begin this book with a journalistic cliche. I wanted to mirror all the journalism we've read in the past 20 years, where the reporter valiantly puts himself in danger, travels to terrorist training camps, watches these people who he treats almost zoologically, exercise through muddy truck tires, go across the monkey bars and so on and so forth. I wanted those people to be white because we very, very rarely present the infrastructure of white supremacist terrorism in this country in the same context with that same understanding. First, we've seen those videos of those guys, crawling under hoops and all that stuff like that, and with turbans on and headdress, what's the hijab on, or whatever the correct term is. But we rarely see them doing it, the backwoods of some southern state, like Oklahoma. So I want to take the reader to a part of the northeastern Oklahoma where, in plain sight, one of the leading figures of the late 20th century, white supremacist infrastructure, was basically allowed to exist in his mini weird caliphate. The response to Oklahoma City entirely leaves out the expansive transformations in law known as material support statutes that criminalize association and authorize surveillance on people who are several steps away from an actual act of violence. All of that is immediately on the table after 9/11 when terrorism isn't white. So you see this massive mobilization, a whole federal building was blowing up. If we're not going to have major, if that's not an excuse to have, some surveillance laws put in place, and there's no reason why, a terrorism attack under white people, should be. And it just, now what we're finally seeing is that change in white terrorism, because what they've done is really, they've exhausted all the brown terrorism. There's no more really to be left. The game after 20 years, as we're seeing, as troops flee from Afghanistan today, has finally run out. So now they're kind of, fixing the eye towards people who are, conservative, but are, poor, demobilized, don't have the infrastructure in the same way. And that, of course, creates a perfect trap for liberals and people on the left to fall into, because these are not good people, the people who wanted to see Gretchen Whitmer kidnapped. But do they deserve to, rot in jail, rot in Guantanamo Bay for the rest of their lives? Or do we need to, expand massive government surveillance to catch them? The answer is no. And liberals, people on the left, need to stand up and say that loudly before it's too late. That's all the time we have for you guys on today's show. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you on Wednesday. Yeah, we're going to go back on Wednesday.